I knew something was wrong the second I walked into the bedroom. 40 years of marriage teaches you to notice the little things, the small shifts that don't belong. Linda was standing by the dresser, stuffing clothes into her suitcase. Too fast. Too nervous. She always packed neatly, folding each item with care. But this? This was rushed, messy. "You leaving early," I said, keeping my voice even. She barely looked at me. "Yeah, my flight got moved up." That was lie number one. I stepped closer. The scent of fresh perfume clung to the air, stronger than usual. Her favorite silver necklace, the one she wore only on special occasions, was already around her neck. A red silk blouse, one I hadn't seen in years, lay on the bed. This wasn't a business trip. I leaned against the doorway, watching her fumble with her suitcase. "Where exactly are you flying to again?" She hesitated, just for a second, before zipping the bag. "Miami. Conference." Line number 2. I didn't push. Not yet. Instead, I walked past her, pretending not to notice the tension in her shoulders, and picked up the skirt she had thrown onto the chair. That's when I saw it. A stain. Small, barely visible under the soft bedroom light, but I knew exactly what it was. Everything clicked at once. I didn't move. Didn't speak. My hands tightened around the fabric, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had spent my entire life controlling my emotions. This moment would be no different. Linda turned around, finally looking at me. "Tom, can you grab my charger?" "I think I left it in the study." She was trying to get me out of the room. That was line number 3. I nodded. "Sure." But I didn't go to the study. I went to her desk. The laptop was open, the screen glowing. One simple password, our wedding date, was all it took. And there it was. "Richard, I can't wait to see you, baby. Our penthouse is ready. Linda, I've been thinking about you all night, wish I was there already." My fingers tightened into fists as I scrolled further. "Richard, I hope we get another mile-high moment on the flight. Just like last time, winking face. Linda, you so bad. I love it, heavy black heart hash." I shut the laptop. Stood up. Took a slow, deep breath. Linda was still in the bedroom, fixing her hair in the mirror, humming to herself. Smiling. Like she hadn't just destroyed 40 years of marriage. I walked back in and leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Hey, do me a favor." She turned, brushing her hair over her shoulder. "What?" I smiled. "Make sure to wave at me when you board your flight." Linda gave me a puzzled look, her smile faltering for a second. She was trying to read me, trying to figure out if I knew something. But I gave her nothing. Just the same calm expression I always wore. She forced a laugh. "What do you mean, wave at you?" I shrugged. "Just saying, enjoy your flight." She hesitated again, then turned back to the mirror, fixing her lipstick. "I'll text you when I land." Another lie. She had no intention of texting me. I watched her pick up her suitcase and walk out of the room like everything was fine, like she wasn't walking straight into her own downfall. I let her leave. Let her think she was getting away with it. Then, I moved. I grabbed my phone and booked a seat on her flight. One row behind business class. Where I could see everything. At the airport, I stayed out of sight, letting her think she was alone. She stood near the gate, talking on her phone, smiling, playing with her necklace. With him, no doubt. Boarding was called, and I watched as she stepped onto the plane, confident, relaxed. I waited. Counted the seconds. Then I followed. She didn't see me. didn't notice as I walked down the aisle, passing rows of unsuspecting passengers. I sat down, adjusted my seatbelt, and settled in. From my seat, I had a perfect view of her. Of him. Richard was already there, waiting. The moment she reached her seat, his hand was on her thigh. She leaned in, whispering something in his ear, laughing softly. And just like that, 40 years of marriage were reduced to a joke. I clenched my jaw, but I didn't move. Not yet. The plane taxied onto the runway, the engines roaring to life. The captain's voice echoed through the speakers, welcoming everyone on board. The flight attendants gave their usual safety speech. None of it mattered. Because I already knew how this flight was going to end. I kept my breathing steady, my hands relaxed on the armrests. I wasn't here to make a scene. Not yet. The plane climbed into the sky, the city shrinking beneath us. Linda and Richard were in the row ahead, oblivious to everything except each other. I could hear them laughing softly, whispering. I knew that laugh. I had heard it 1,000 times before, in the early years of our marriage. It was the laugh she used when she was completely comfortable with someone. When she was happy. I tightened my grip on the armrest. 40 years. 40 years, and she never laughed like that with me anymore. The flight attendants started moving through the cabin, handing out drinks. I watched as Richard leaned closer to Linda, his hand resting on her thigh. She didn't move it away. She placed her hand over his. I breathed in slowly through my nose. Not yet. Richard flagged down a flight attendant and ordered champagne. Linda giggled, pressing her fingers to her lips. "You terrible," she murmured, but she didn't refuse. The flight attendant returned with 2 glasses, pouring the bubbling liquid into delicate flutes. Richard lifted his glass, turning slightly toward Linda. "A toast," he said, his voice smooth, arrogant. "To stolen moments." Linda smiled, clinking her glass against his. "To stolen moments," she echoed, taking a sip. I closed my eyes for half a second. 40 years. I thought about our wedding day, the way she had looked at me when she said, "I do." I thought about the nights we had stayed up late, talking about our future. About the times she had held my hand when life got tough, when we lost our first baby, when my father died. And now, here she was, raising a glass to stolen moments with another man. I had seen enough. I unbuckled my seatbelt, stood up, and stepped forward. The moment Linda saw me, the color drained from her face. Richard noticed her expression and turned. He frowned, confused. "Can we help you?" I smiled. A slow, calculated smile. "Actually, yeah," I said. "You can both help me understand something." Linda's hands tightened around her glass. "Tom, what are you doing here?" "Oh, don't stop on my account," I said, gesturing to the drinks. "Please, continue your toast." What was it again? Yes. To stolen moments. Richard's frown deepened. He looked at Linda. "You know him?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. I leaned in slightly. "Oh, she knows me. We've been married for 40 years. The passengers nearby had started to notice. Heads were turning, whispers spreading. Richard's expression flickered, just for a second, but I caught it. He was calculating. Measuring his next move. He set his glass down and straightened his shoulders. "Look, I don't know what you think is happening here, but..." "Save it," I cut him off. "I read the texts. I saw the emails. I know everything." Linda swallowed hard. "Tom, let's not do this here." I tilted my head. "Oh? Where would you prefer? Should we wait until you're in his penthouse? Maybe right after you finish your mile-high moment?" Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right, man, I get it. You're upset. But this isn't the place. I turned sharply toward him. You don't get a say in this. He leaned back slightly, caught off guard by the sharpness in my voice. Linda reached for my arm. Tom, please. I pulled away from her touch like it burned. Don't. Her eyes filled with something, guilt, maybe. Or fear. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat. A flight attendant had appeared beside me, her voice firm but nervous. She could feel the tension in the air. I looked at her. Then at Linda. Then at Richard. And I made a decision. I nodded. Of course. I turned, then, without warning, I drove my fist straight into Richard's jaw. The impact sent him crashing back against his seat, the champagne glass tipping over, spilling across his expensive shirt. The cabin erupted into chaos. Passengers gasped, someone screamed, and the flight attendant frantically called for security. Richard recovered quickly, shoving himself upright. You son of a... I hit him again. This time, blood sprayed from his nose. Linda shrieked, grabbing my arm, but I shoved her away. You don't get to touch me. Richard lunged at me, but he was soft, pampered. He had never taken a real hit in his life. I sidestepped easily, driving my elbow into his ribs. He gasped, collapsing against the seat. More shouting. More movement. The flight attendants were calling for help. I felt hands grabbing at me, other passengers trying to pull me back. I let them. Because I had made my point. I straightened my jacket, breathing hard. Linda stared at me, her hands over her mouth. Richard groaned, cradling his face. I looked at him, then at her. And I shook my head. This isn't over. Then, I let security drag me away. The security team forced me down the narrow aisle, gripping my arms as if I was some kind of wild animal. I didn't resist. I had already done what I came here to do, at least, the first part. The other passengers gawked, whispering to each other, some with their phones out, recording. Good. Let them see. Let the world see what happens when a man like me gets pushed too far. The flight attendants were flustered, their professionalism slipping as they scrambled to regain control. One of them, a younger woman with a stiff smile, tried to diffuse the tension. Sir, we just need you to calm down and take a seat. I wasn't stupid. I knew how this worked. The moment we landed, the authorities would be waiting. They'd want statements, they'd want explanations. They'd want to hear why a man in his 60s just beat the hell out of a first-class passenger mid-flight. I kept my expression neutral. I'm calm. They didn't believe me, of course. The two security officers exchanged glances before tightening their grips. We're moving you to the back of the plane, one of them said. You done here? Done? No. Not yet. I let them drag me down the aisle, past more curious stares, past wide-eyed passengers who clutched their armrests like I was a madman who might turn on them next. Linda hadn't moved. She sat frozen in her seat, her hands clenched in her lap, her face pale. I caught her eyes as I passed, but she looked away. Guilt? Shame? Fear? Didn't matter. Richard was slumped in his seat, dabbing at his bloody nose with a napkin. He muttered something under his breath, something that might have been an insult if he weren't so rattled. I smirked. You'll want to get that looked at, Richie. His jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Coward. They shoved me into an empty row near the back of the plane and took the seat beside me, effectively trapping me in. One of the officers radioed the captain, likely informing him that the situation was contained. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. I had time to think now. Time to plan. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The rest of the flight dragged on in silence. Nobody spoke to me, nobody dared to meet my gaze. Fine by me. When the plane finally touched down, the tension thickened. The second we hit the runway, one of the security officers leaned in. "You going to exit first? Authorities will be waiting." I smirked. Looking forward to it. The passengers were ordered to stay seated as I was escorted down the aisle. As I passed Linda, I slowed just enough to whisper, "Hope it was worth it." She flinched. Richard, still holding a tissue to his busted nose, didn't say a word. Smart move. The second I stepped onto the jet bridge, uniformed officers were waiting. A tall, broad-shouldered one stepped forward. "Mr. Callahan, you'll need to come with us." I nodded. No point in fighting this part. They led me through the terminal, away from the prying eyes of the other travelers, into a small security room. 2 chairs, a desk, a camera in the corner. Standard procedure. One officer sat across from me, flipping open a notepad. "So, you want to explain what the hell that was about?" I met his gaze, unwavering. "Just a misunderstanding." His brow lifted. "A misunderstanding? You broke a man's nose." I shrugged. Maybe his face shouldn't have gotten in the way of my fist. The officer sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, Callahan, you lucky. The airline just wants to ban you from future flights, and the other guy, Richard Wayne, he's not pressing charges. Yet." That was interesting. A man like Richard, the kind who thrived on power and status, didn't just let things go. Which meant he was afraid of something. Me? Or the mess I had already started unraveling? The officer leaned forward. "You walk out of here, you go home, and you stay out of trouble. That's your best option." I nodded. "Sure." He didn't believe me. Smart man. Outside the airport, the heat was suffocating. The Florida sun baked the pavement, waves of heat shimmering in the distance. I adjusted my jacket, taking a moment to survey my surroundings. Linda and Richard wouldn't be far behind. I pulled out my phone, checking the messages I had scheduled before the flight. One to Richard's wife, detailing every last bit of his affair. With proof. One to a journalist I knew, someone who loved a juicy scandal. One to an old contact of mine, a man who specialized in making life very, very difficult for people like Richard. I tucked my phone away. Checkmate. A few minutes later, I spotted them. Linda and Richard emerged from the terminal, walking quickly, their heads down. Trying to disappear into the crowd. Not a chance. I stepped forward, making sure my presence was known. Linda's eyes widened. "Tom." Richard stiffened. I smiled. "Hope you enjoyed your flight." Linda froze. For a brief second, she looked like she wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The airport was crowded, people moving in all directions, the buzz of conversations and rolling suitcases filling the air. But right here, right now, it was just the 3 of us. Richard glanced around, as if checking for security, but no one was coming. He wasn't the victim anymore. No blood, no fists flying, just a man caught in a storm he wasn't ready for. Linda swallowed hard. "Tom, please. Don't do this here." I tilted my head, amused. "Do what, Linda? Talk?" Richard stepped in, trying to reclaim some control. "Listen, Callahan, I think we all need to." I laughed. Loud enough that a few nearby people turned to look. "Callahan? You're on last-name terms with me now, Richie?" I took a step closer, forcing him back. "You sleep with a man's wife, and suddenly you think you get to be civil?" His jaw tightened. "This isn't the place." "You're right," I cut in. The place was 35,000 feet in the air when you were making plans to screw my wife in a bathroom stall. Linda sucked in a sharp breath. Richard went pale. More heads turned. Good. I leaned in just enough for only them to hear. But don't worry. We're past that now. This isn't about fists anymore, Richie. He didn't like the way I said that. I could see it in his eyes, the shift from irritation to unease. He should be uneasy. I patted my jacket pocket, where my phone rested. Check your messages, Richie. Richard hesitated, then pulled out his phone. Linda did the same. The second their screens lit up, I saw the panic settle in. Linda gasped. What did you do? Richard scrolled frantically, his fingers trembling slightly. I already knew what they were seeing. Pushpin message to Richard's wife. You deserve to know the truth. Your husband has been cheating on you with my wife, Linda Callahan. Here's the proof. You'll find hotel receipts, messages, and timestamps attached. I hope this helps in the upcoming divorce. Pushpin message to the press. Richard Wayne, CEO of Wayne Luxury Resorts, has been using corporate funds to cover up multiple affairs. Below, you'll find details on his most recent one. I believe this would make a fantastic headline. Pushpin message to Linda's boss. I believe you have an employee who misuses company trips for personal pleasure. The attached documents should clarify everything. Linda let out a choked sound, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Richard? He was breathing heavily, nostrils flaring, his face growing redder by the second. Tom, Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. You can't do this. I grinned. Already did. Richard's head snapped up. You son of a bitch. He lunged forward, but I didn't move. I just stood there, calm, collected, watching as he fought the urge to throw a punch he knew he wouldn't land. I chuckled. What's wrong, Richie? You were fine running your mouth when you were whispering in my wife's ear. What happened to all that confidence? Linda stepped between us. Tom, we can fix this. We can talk. You don't have to ruin everything. I raised an eyebrow. Ruin? I gestured to Richard. He ruined our marriage. You helped him. I'm just making sure you both feel the consequences. Linda shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. I made a mistake. I laughed again. A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk from the store. What you did was a choice. Richard finally spoke, his voice strained. I'll sue you for this. I turned to him, my smile never fading. For what? Telling the truth? I nodded toward his phone. I didn't fabricate a thing. Every receipt, every message, real. Verifiable. And right now, your wife is reading all of it. Richard started typing furiously on his phone, probably trying to do damage control. Too late. Linda's phone rang. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Even from here, I could hear the shouting on the other end. Linda flinched. No, wait, please, I can explain. More yelling. Furious, betrayed. Linda's hand trembled. Just listen. Click. She looked at the phone in horror. She hung up. I smirked. Guess she didn't like your explanation. Richard was still typing, his breathing ragged. Then his phone rang. He stared at the screen like it was a live grenade. Slowly, he answered. Honey, I didn't hear what she said, but I saw the way his face fell. The way his entire body tensed. Linda touched his arm. Richard? He didn't even look at her. Then, his phone slipped from his hand and hit the pavement. I folded my arms. That'd be the lawyers, huh? Wonder how much she's taking. Richard's eyes snapped to me, pure hatred burning behind them. But he didn't say a word. Linda looked between us, panic clear in her expression. Tom. Please. I met her gaze. You already lost me, Linda. Now you're losing everything else. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I stepped back, taking in the sight of the two of them, standing in the middle of a crowded airport, their perfect little world crumbling around them. I took a slow, satisfied breath. This was just the beginning. Linda stood frozen, gripping her phone like it was a lifeline. Her breathing had turned shallow, uneven. Richard, on the other hand, looked ready to explode. His face was red, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. His whole world was slipping through his fingers, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. I let the silence stretch. Let them feel it. Let them drown in it. Around us, the airport continued to buzz with movement, families rushing to their gates, couples holding hands, businessmen checking their watches. But here, in this little pocket of destruction, time had stopped. I wanted them to sit in this moment. I wanted them to understand, really understand, that there was no coming back from this. Linda swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom. I know you're angry, but... I held up a hand. Don't. Her mouth snapped shut. I wasn't interested in apologies. Apologies meant nothing when they came after you'd already set fire to everything in your path. Richard finally spoke, his voice low, dangerous. You have no idea what you've done. I chuckled. Oh, I know exactly what I've done. He stepped forward, chest puffed up like he thought he could intimidate me. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. I raised an eyebrow. That right? His lips curled into a sneer. You think this is over? You think I won't come after you for this? I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just kept my gaze locked on his. Richie, you can try whatever you want. But you and I both know you don't have the stomach for a real fight. His nostrils flared. I'll ruin you. I laughed. A deep, genuine laugh. Buddy, I've already lost everything I gave a damn about. That makes me a very dangerous man. His expression flickered. Just for a second. But I saw it. Doubt. Fear. Good. I took another step closer, lowering my voice so only he and Linda could hear. You're a spoiled little rich boy who's used to buying his way out of trouble. But you can't buy your way out of this. I gestured toward the phone he dropped. Your wife's divorcing you. Your reputation's in the gutter. And when the board of your company finds out about the financial discrepancies I sent them? I leaned in, lowering my voice to a whisper. You won't just be broke, Richie. You'll be in a cell. His face paled. You bluffing. I smirked. Guess we'll find out. Linda's breathing hitched. Tom, please. I turned to her. Please what, Linda? My voice was calm, measured. Please stop? Please undo it? Please pretend I didn't just catch you planning to screw this guy in a first-class bathroom while I sat 20 feet away? She flinched. I gave you 40 years, I continued, my voice growing colder. 40 years of loyalty. Of trust. Of putting you first. And this? This is how you repay me? Tears welled in her eyes. No, I cut her off. You don't get to speak. Not anymore. She took a shaky breath. Where am I supposed to go? I tilted my head. Not my problem. Richard turned his attention back to me. You really think this makes you the bigger man? He wiped at his nose, wincing at the pain. Attacking me on a plane, ruining Linda's life, blowing everything up like a damn lunatic? I stared at him. No, Richard. My voice was quiet, lethal. I think it makes me the man you should never have fucked with. He opened his mouth to reply, but I was already turning. Already walking away. And they didn't follow. Because they knew that whatever happened next, they had already lost. I didn't go straight home. Home didn't feel like home anymore. Instead, I found a quiet bar, the kind with dim lighting and no questions asked. I slid onto a stool, nodding at the bartender. "Whiskey," I said. "Neat." The glass was in front of me within seconds. I lifted it, swirling the amber liquid. I should have felt something. Satisfaction, maybe. Relief. But all I felt was empty. 40 years. Gone. I took a slow sip, letting the burn ground me. I knew I wasn't done. Not yet. Richard still had loose ends that needed cutting. Linda still had lessons to learn. But for now? For now, I just drank. The whiskey burned on the way down, but I barely felt it. I sat there, staring at the glass, turning it slowly between my fingers. The bar was dimly lit, quiet, the kind of place where men sat alone with their regrets. No loud music, no fake smiles from bartenders pretending to care about your problems. Just silence and strong liquor. Exactly what I needed. I should have felt better. Should have felt victorious. I had torn Linda's life apart in a matter of hours. Richard's world was caving in around him. By the time I was done, he'd be lucky if he had a dime left to his name. And yet, there was no satisfaction. No thrill. Just a numb, hollow space where something used to be. The bartender, an older guy with tired eyes, walked over. "You good?" I looked up at him. "Do I look good?" He snorted. "Fair point." He grabbed the whiskey bottle and poured me another. "You want to talk about it?" I huffed out a laugh. "Not really." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. I picked up my glass, staring into the amber liquid. "Ever give someone everything?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. 40 years of your life? Only to wake up one day and realize they threw it all away? The bartender leaned against the counter, considering my words. "Once," he said finally. "A long time ago." I looked at him. "What happened?" He smirked. "I burned her house down." I blinked. Then he laughed. "Relax. Not literally." He tapped his temple. "But in here? In my head? I made damn sure she lost everything she cared about." I raised my glass. "Smart man." He lifted an invisible toast back before stepping away to serve another customer. I sat in silence, sipping my drink, feeling the burn settle deep in my chest. And then my phone buzzed. I stared at the screen for a moment before picking it up. Unknown number. I already knew who it was. I answered but said nothing. Linda's voice came through the line, small, broken. "Tom, please. Talk to me." I swirled the whiskey in my glass, listening to the desperation in her tone. "Talk to you?" I repeated slowly. "After everything?" I messed up. Her voice cracked. "I know I did. But you don't have to do this." I chuckled. "Do what, Linda? Hold you accountable? I have nowhere to go." She sniffled. "My accounts are frozen, my job." "Gone?" I interrupted. "Yeah, I know. I made sure of it." Silence. Then, a whisper. "I loved you." I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the glass tighter. No, I said coldly. You loved what I gave you. You loved the security, the comfort. You loved knowing that no matter what, I would always be there. She sobbed quietly. I was lonely. I slammed the glass down onto the bar, making the bartender glance over. Lonely? I hissed. You think I wasn't? You think I didn't feel the distance? You could have talked to me, Linda. But instead, you spread your legs for the first rich bastard who gave you attention. She sobbed harder. Tom, please. I just... Click. I hung up. Let her drown in her own misery. Let her sit in the ashes of what she destroyed. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, forcing the tension from my shoulders. Linda was done. There was nothing left to say. But Richard? Richard still had a lesson to learn. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and sent a simple message to a contact I hadn't spoken to in years. Pushpin subject, Ewain Luxury Resorts, financial misconduct. You might want to take a closer look at your CEO's personal transactions. Attached are records that should make for an interesting read. I attached the files, hit send, and leaned back in my seat. Richard was about to find out that money couldn't save him this time. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, watching the sent email sit in my outbox like a loaded gun. The shot had been fired, now, it was just a matter of waiting for the bullet to hit. The bartender refilled my glass without a word. He could probably see it in my face, that look a man gets when he's about to burn everything to the ground. Good. Let it burn. I checked my watch. If I knew Richard, he was still scrambling, making calls, trying to salvage whatever was left of his crumbling world. He was probably on the phone with his wife, begging, bargaining. Trying to explain why he had spent company money on his personal conquests. I hoped she was smarter than Linda. The front door of the bar creaked open, and I glanced up out of habit. And there he was. Richard Wayne. He didn't see me at first. His eyes darted around the room, scanning the faces, looking for someone. He was jittery, sweating under his expensive suit, his usual cocky confidence replaced with something closer to desperation. I smirked. He must have gotten my email. I watched as he muttered something to the bartender, who barely gave him a glance before nodding toward my direction. Richard turned, and the second he saw me, his whole body went rigid. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he straightened his shoulders and walked over. Brave. Stupid, but brave. He slid into the seat across from me, resting his elbows on the table. His hands were clasped together, but I could see the tension in them. You, he said, voice low. I sipped my whiskey. Me. You sent it. I didn't bother pretending not to know what he was talking about. Yep. He exhaled sharply through his nose, jaw tightening. You don't understand what you've done. I leaned forward slightly. No, Richie. You don't understand what you've done. You thought you could fuck another man's wife and walk away clean? I shook my head. Actions have consequences. He slammed his hand against the table. A few heads turned. You think you're some kind of hero? His voice was rising. Some righteous avenger? You're just a bitter old man who couldn't keep his wife happy. I chuckled. You're really grasping at straws now. He clenched his fists. You have no idea what kind of people I know. The kind of money I have. You had, I corrected. Past tense. His phone buzzed, and he snatched it up, glancing at the screen. His face paled. I smiled. Bad news? He didn't answer. I took another sip of my drink, letting him squirm. I'm guessing that's the board of your company? Maybe your lawyers? Let me guess, They're wondering why a bunch of unauthorized expenses just came to light? His grip tightened on the phone. I leaned back in my seat, stretching out my legs. I told you, Richie. You don't get to buy your way out of this one. He stood up abruptly, shoving his chair back. This isn't over, he spat. I smiled again. Oh, I know. And that was the best part. Because I wasn't done yet. Richard stormed out of the bar, his phone clutched so tightly in his hand I half expected it to shatter. I didn't bother watching him go. He could run all he wanted, he wasn't outrunning what was coming for him. I took another slow sip of my whiskey, savoring the burn. It tasted better now. The bartender wandered over, eyeing the empty seat across from me. Friend of yours? I snorted. Something like that. He smirked. Want me to put his drinks on your tab? I chuckled. Nah. He's got enough debts piling up. The bartender nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I pulled out my phone, checking my messages. Pushpin new email, Wayne Luxury Resorts, financial misconduct. Mr. Callahan, thank you for bringing this to our attention. After reviewing the attached documentation, we have initiated an internal investigation into Mr. Wayne's expenditures. Given the severity of these allegations, we anticipate swift action. If you have any additional information, please feel free to share. I grinned. Swift action. That meant Richard was officially a sinking ship. I could almost picture it, his phone blowing up with calls from board members, investors pulling their money, lawyers scrambling to clean up the mess. His world was unraveling, one thread at a time. And I wasn't done pulling. I tapped my screen, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Pushpin Derek Simmons, private investigator. Derek owed me a favor. A big one. I hit dial. He picked up on the third ring. Tom. Been a while. Yeah, I said. I need you to dig into someone. Who's the target? I glanced toward the bar's front window, where I could still see Richard's car sitting in the parking lot. Richard Wayne. Derek let out a low whistle. The hotel guy? Damn. What did he do? Fucked my wife, I said flatly. Derek let out a short laugh. That'll do it. Find everything you can on him, I continued. Business dealings, shady investments, offshore accounts. I want him bled dry. Derek didn't hesitate. Consider it done. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, watching the people outside go about their lives, unaware of the destruction unfolding just a few feet away. Richard thought this was over. He had no idea. The next morning, I woke up to a dozen missed calls. 3 from Linda. 9 from Richard. I ignored all of them. Instead, I focused on the one voicemail that mattered. Pushpin new voicemail, Derek Simmons. Tom, you gonna want to hear this. Your boy Richie has more skeletons in his closet than a damn graveyard. Call me back. I called him back immediately. He answered on the first ring. You sitting down? I grabbed my coffee and sank into a chair. What do you have? Derek chuckled. Let's just say Richard Wayne isn't as squeaky clean as he likes to pretend. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, money funneled through fake charities, bribes to city officials for construction permits. He paused. Oh, and this one's my favorite. Turns out, he's been blackmailing a few of his own business partners. I raised an eyebrow. Blackmail? Yep. He gets dirt on them, cheating scandals, tax fraud, whatever, then uses it to keep them under his thumb. Classic power play. I smirked. And now someone has dirt on him. Derek laughed. Damn right. I'm sending you everything now. My phone pinged with incoming files. I opened them, scanning through the pages. Emails. Bank statements. Recorded conversations. This wasn't just bad. This was lethal. Richard Wayne was about to lose more than his money. He was about to lose his entire life. I sat back in my chair, staring at the mountain of evidence Derek had just dropped into my lap. This wasn't just a scandal. This was a death sentence. Richard Wayne was finished. Bribery, tax evasion, offshore laundering, blackmail, he had his fingers in every dirty deal imaginable. He hadn't just been careless. He had been reckless, convinced that his money and power would keep him safe forever. And now? Now, he had made the mistake of pissing off a man who had nothing left to lose. I tapped my fingers against the table, considering my next move. This kind of information wasn't just dangerous, it was nuclear. If I handled it right, Richard wouldn't just lose his money. He'd lose everything. I opened my contacts and made 2 calls. Pushpin first, the IRS. Nothing made the government move faster than the scent of unpaid taxes. With the offshore accounts Derek had uncovered, Richard was looking at years of fraud, money funneled through fake charities, shell companies, and hidden investments. Pushpin second, the press. I sent the documents to every major news outlet I could think of. Some would ignore it. Some wouldn't. But all it took was one story to break, one headline to start the avalanche. I finished my coffee and leaned back in my chair. Now, all I had to do was wait. It didn't take long. By noon, my phone was blowing up. Pushpin breaking news, CEO Richard Wayne under federal investigation. Wayne Luxury Resorts CEO Richard Wayne is under scrutiny after allegations of financial misconduct, bribery, and tax fraud surfaced earlier today. Sources indicate that federal agencies are now involved, reviewing evidence that could result in criminal charges. I smirked. That was fast. I could only imagine what Richard was doing right now. Probably pacing in his overpriced penthouse, screaming into his phone, trying to figure out how everything had collapsed overnight. I almost wished I could see it. Almost. Then Linda called. I debated ignoring it. I should have ignored it. But some small, bitter part of me wanted to hear the desperation in her voice. I answered. She was crying. Hard. Tom, oh my God, what did you do? I swirled my whiskey, watching the ice melt. I did what you and your boyfriend thought I wouldn't. You ruined him, she sobbed. You ruined me. I laughed coldly. You ruined yourself, Linda. I just made sure you felt it. He's going to jail. Her voice was shaking. Do you understand that? He could go to prison for this. Good. She gasped like I had slapped her. How can you be so heartless? I finished for her. I guess I learned from you. Silence. I let it stretch, let her sit in it. Finally, she whispered, I never wanted this. I sighed. Then maybe you should have kept your legs closed. Click. I hung up. And just like that, it was over. Linda was alone. Richard was ruined. And me? For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I poured myself another drink and walked to the balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Then, I smiled. And I drank to the end.